Picture a meeting room. Someone pitches an idea and two people respond. The first says it's promising, that it could work if a few things go right. The second leans back, arms crossed, and lists everything wrong with it in 4 sharp sentences. Without knowing anything else about either person, you already trust the second one more. Not because their reasoning was better, not because they were right, just because they sounded like they were seeing something the rest of the room had missed. That instinct isn't a personal quirk, it's a wiring flaw baked into how you evaluate other minds. And once you understand where it comes from, you'll start noticing it everywhere, including in your own head. Psychologist Teresa Amabile ran an experiment in the early 1980s that quietly exposed this. She gave people book reviews to read, some harshly critical, some warmly positive, and asked them to rate the reviewers' intelligence. The negative reviewers were consistently rated as smarter, more competent, more capable, even when the actual quality of their argument was identical to the positive reviewers. Amabile called it the effect of being brilliant but cruel. And what makes it unsettling is that it wasn't about substance at all. It was about tone. Cutting someone down reads as insight. Building someone up reads as naivety. And your brain made that judgment in seconds, with no additional evidence, purely from the emotional temperature of the words. This is strange enough on its own, but it gets stranger when you ask why doubt would carry that particular kind of social weight. Intelligence isn't supposed to be about mood, it's supposed to be about accuracy. Yet somewhere in your evaluation of other people, harshness got quietly rebranded as rigor, and warmth got rebranded as blindness. To understand how that swap happened, you have to go back much further than any boardroom, to an environment where getting this judgment wrong could genuinely cost you your life. For most of human history, the person who noticed the danger was the person who kept the group alive, not the person who noticed the flowers, or the good weather, or the abundance of fruit that season. The one who said, "That shadow in the grass isn't right," was providing something the group couldn't survive without. Over enough generations, a shortcut formed. Pointing out danger became associated with competence, because in a world full of real physical threats, it usually was. The problem is that your brain never received the update that most modern threats are no longer lions. They're ideas, pitches, plans, and other people's optimism. And the shortcut doesn't check for that difference. It just fires the same way it always has, treating a skeptical voice in a meeting the same way it once treated someone spotting a predator in the grass. Neuroscientists have traced part of this to the amygdala, the same threat detection structure responsible for your negativity bias in general. It doesn't just make bad news memorable, it also makes the messenger of bad news look more valuable, because in the logic of survival, the person naming the danger is the one keeping you alive long enough to reproduce. Your admiration for the skeptic isn't really admiration for their intellect. It's a much older reflex, quietly dressed up as respect. But there's a second layer to this that has nothing to do with ancient predators and everything to do with modern social risk, and it might be the more interesting half of the story. Being wrong as an optimist is expensive in a way that being wrong as a pessimist simply isn't. If you say an idea will fail and it succeeds anyway, nobody remembers your prediction. If you say an idea will succeed and it fails, everyone remembers exactly what you said, and they remember it about you specifically. This asymmetry means that pessimism functions almost like an insurance policy for your reputation. Predicting failure costs you nothing if you're wrong, and earns you credibility if you're right. Predicting success costs you your credibility if you're wrong, and earns you very little if you're right, because success was expected all along. Given that math, of course the smart move looks like doubt. It isn't that pessimists see the world more clearly, it's that pessimism is simply the cheaper bet, socially speaking, and your brain has learned to treat cheap bets as wise ones. Which raises an uncomfortable question about the people you find most convincing. Are they actually seeing more of the risk landscape than everyone else? Or have they just found the safest position to stand in while looking like they see more? The unsettling answer is that most of the time, you can't tell the difference just by listening to the confidence in someone's voice, and neither can they. Meanwhile, on the other side of this equation, optimism gets treated by your brain almost like a design flaw. Neuroscientist Tali Sharot has spent years studying what she calls the optimism bias, the tendency of most people to underestimate their own chances of bad outcomes and overestimate their chances of good ones. What's revealing isn't just that the bias exists, it's how people react when they learn about it in other people. An optimistic prediction gets treated as a symptom of poor judgment, something to be corrected, medicated with realism. A pessimistic prediction rarely receives the same scrutiny, even though it can be just as biased, just as disconnected from the actual odds, simply pointed in the opposite direction. Your brain doesn't apply the same skepticism to skepticism that it applies to hope. It treats one bias as a flaw and the other as clarity, and that alone should tell you the judgment was never really about accuracy in the first place. There's also a subtler reward hiding inside this whole pattern, one that has less to do with other people and more to do with what happens inside your own head. Identifying what could go wrong produces a distinct kind of mental satisfaction, a small hit of feeling clever, competent, one step ahead. Spotting the flaw in a plan feels like solving a puzzle. Spotting the potential in a plan feels comparatively passive, like simply agreeing with what's already in front of you. Even when the two require equal amounts of analysis, only one of them feels like work. And your brain has a long-standing preference for confusing, effortful-feeling thoughts with intelligent ones. Modern environments have learned to exploit this without anyone designing them to on purpose. Attention systems, whether that's a comment section, a group chat, or an algorithm deciding what to show you next, consistently reward the sharp takedown over the quiet, constructive suggestion. A cutting critique spreads faster and further than a hopeful proposal. Not because it's more accurate, but because it produces exactly the emotional charge your ancient threat detection circuitry was built to notice and repeat. You're not imagining that cynicism gets amplified more than hope. It does. And now you know the specific psychological lever being pulled every time it happens. So where does that leave the actual distinction between wisdom and fear dressed up as wisdom? The honest answer is that real intelligence was never about which direction your prediction points. It was never a contest between the person who sees problems and the person who sees potential. The genuinely sharpest response in any room is neither reflexive doubt nor reflexive hope, but the much rarer skill of running the actual numbers, updating on real evidence, and being willing to be wrong in either direction without needing the safety of always guessing failure. That skill doesn't look as impressive in the moment. It doesn't produce the same quick hit of feeling clever, but it's the only version of judgment that's actually tracking reality instead of tracking which bias felt safest to perform in front of other people. Which brings you back to that meeting room and the two responses to the same idea. You already know, now, why the skeptic sounded smarter. It wasn't their reasoning. It was millions of years of your ancestors surviving by noticing danger first, layered underneath a social calculation that made caution the cheapest possible bet. None of that makes the skeptic wrong. It also doesn't make them right. It simply means the sound of confidence you heard in that sharp, critical voice was never proof of anything except how well they understood, consciously or not, exactly which tone your brain was built to trust.